Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Two very disturbing comments about Black history have been made recently by prominent leaders of the Trump administration. Head of Housing and Urban Development Ben Carson equated slaves to immigrants, and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos described historically Black colleges and universities as pioneers of choice. Is this the beginning of revisionist history of what happened to African Americans in this country? Is this what Donald Trump means by Make America Great Again? Roger, Carol, Bill, and Will are here to talk about this and other current events. The Another View Roundtable is next, so stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
So happy you've joined us today for Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. So much to talk about, so let's just get right to it and meet our roundtable. Roger Chesley is a columnist for the Virginian-Pilot, and you can read his columns every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Hey, Roger.
Hey, Barbara.
How are you? I'm doing great. Good to hear from you. Carol Pretlow is a political science professor with Norfolk State University. Hey, Carol.
Hey, Barbara and everybody.
Our community activist is Mr. Bill Thomas.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
It's wonderful to be back
Glad you were able to fly in and get back to
I'm
us.
here.
And that's excellent.
I'm here. Love it. Love it all.
And Wil LaVeist is here. Will is an author, journalist, and talk show host. Hey, Will.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Barbara. Maxie's doing a good job. Shout out to Maxie, doing a good job.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah, whatever that means. At any rate, I want you guys to take a listen to this.
That's what America is about. A land of dreams and opportunity. There were other immigrants who came here in the bottom of slave ships, worked even longer, even harder for less. But they too had a dream that one day their sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, great-grandsons, great-granddaughters might pursue prosperity and happiness in this land.
Bill, I got to come to you first on this one because really, Mr. Ben Carson talking about slaves as immigrants.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Same thing that President Barack Obama did.
Continue.
In his remarks to President's naturalization ceremony in December 15, 2015, he said, after comment, certainly if it wasn't easy for those African heritage who had not come here voluntarily and yet in their own way were immigrants themselves. Barack Obama. I think it's a lot to do about nothing. I think some people don't want President Trump to be president. They're angry, mad, upset, delusional. This is stupid.
Roger.
It's funny that Bill would use the word delusional in that reference. Yeah, a lot of people don't want President Trump as the leader. That doesn't mean that you can still have two things that be true, that the comments were crazy and that he shouldn't have made them. And as of course, I wrote a column about this that was in yesterday's paper, and you should have seen the several individuals who said, but the Federalist did something that showed all the references that President Obama said something similar. The problem was both the messenger and the setting. Why, in goodness' name, he chose his first major address to HUD employees to even do something or even delve into an issue that has nothing to do with housing. It has nothing to do with urban development. It was just silly. And then secondly, the fact that he walked back several of the comments or tried to walk back several of the comments because of all of the outcry that erupted from it, it shows you that, yet again, he puts his foot in his mouth. Now, it's one thing to say, if he were leading Health and Human Services, if he were the Surgeon General, fine. He's unqualified for the position that he's been confirmed as. But also, he gets into these tangents that just simply make no sense.
Well, he walked back his comments. He said, quote, the slave narrative and immigrant narrative are two entirely different experiences. Slaves were ripped from their families and their homes and forced against their will after being sold into slavery by slave traders. The immigrants made the choice to come to America. The two experiences should never be intertwined nor forgotten as we demand the necessary progress towards an America that's inclusive and provides access to equal opportunity for all. But Will, I mean, why do you think he would even make that statement to begin with, equating slavery to immigration?
I think because both Ben Carson and President Barack Obama were wrong
Thank you.
in making that statement. And what both of them are doing is, in the spirit of trying to be bridge builders
Absolutely.
and reconcilers, what they do is they are diminishing
Absolutely.
the experience, the harsh, tragic, inhumane experience that is the elephant in the room that America as a culture, as a society, has never effectively dealt with. You got two groups of people who have been savagely dehumanized. That's the Native Americans, and that's the African slave and African Americans in this country. And instead of us being honest about it,
Thank you.
and dealing with it as human beings, as brothers and sisters, saying this was wrong, how can we move forward? How can we move forward together as a people? There are groups of people such as Carson and his rhetoric, and President Obama and his rhetoric,
Thank you,
and
Lord.
how he dressed racism throughout his 8 years, that take the approach of, I don't want to make people uncomfortable,
Amen.
so I'll diminish our experience to make people more comfortable and try to be a reconciler. You would never see that happen among the Jewish community
Amen.
concerning the Holocaust, and by right, it should never happen. What we should be doing is what we began to do in the Civil Rights Movement, which is you had whites and blacks coming together, working side by side, dying side by side for what was right. Not diminishing it, not trying to ignore it, but going side by
And
side.
not trying to change history.
Not trying to change history. And both these men
Thank you.
were wrong.
Thank you.
Bill, I hear you in the amen corner over
Okay,
there.
come on.
Bring it,
my brother,
Bill.
then, my brother. No, he's absolutely telling the truth. I mean, we are the Native Americans were murdered, and they're gone. They were put on reservations and forgotten, and still are forgotten. That's salvatory. And in terms of the Europeans, some of the Europeans that came over here were criminals and crooks and got thrown out of their native lands to come over here to get rid of them. No, to diminish it both is horrible. I mean, I think he's trying to say things. I think they're both playing this little stupid game of trying to diminish what happened to black people.
But that's not what you just said. You said earlier
I said
this
both-
was much to do about nothing.
And I do think it's much to do about nothing in the scope of things.
Well,
our schools are failing. Our men aren't working. We got murder. We got abortions. We're living in a crazy
Tangents.
situation, and that's the context I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's the context I'm talking
But
about.
let me ask you, Carol, because if history, we're talking about people who are leaders within this administration, and people from, years and years from now, when they read this stuff, they will start to see history as differently. Do you think?
Yes, I do. And I was disappointed in Ben Carson. First of all, I had admired him previously because of his measure and his almost
Results.
pause to think consecutively and concurrently and to address issues non-emotionally. But when I heard the address, I was disappointed. First of all, he could have used that and talked about the melting pot experience. Here's what Native Americans contribute. Here's what African Americans. We come from different psychological perspectives, and here we are in the process of regrouping and building on this nation. But he didn't do that. And when he equated slavery and immigration, I was appalled and disgusted.
Was President Barack Obama wrong?
Yes, both
you.
of them were, but
Okay,
I'm
thank
not.
you. That's
Two
all I want.
wrongs don't make a right. Two
That's
wrongs
all I
don't
want to
make a
hear.
right.
Nothing more. Nothing
When
less.
when you have the leader of the country trying to make a point at a more appropriate setting than what Carson was at, some people would criticize him. I don't even remember it being an issue because I think you have to also consider the source who's making the comments. And the fact of the matter is that Carson, during the presidential campaign, when he was still running for office, he did some bizarre things. There were certain mannerisms of him during the debates that just seemed, frankly, weird. And the fact that he also equated Obamacare with the worst thing in the country that since slavery, I mean, come on. I mean, it's not the first time that he has made some outrageous comments.
Well,
President
Roger
hadn't
is
done that.
actually
Yeah.
Roger is absolutely right about that, because that's one of the things that I was going to mention. That Again, he said, and I quote, this was in 2013, Obamacare is really, I think, the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery. Again, this is a mindset. I mean, and that was a prepared statement as opposed to what he was doing at HUD,
Right.
which was he was speaking whatever that word is.
Extemporaneously.
Yeah, and that is the problem of a mindset of, okay, and again, as I pointed out, President Barack Obama did the same thing. He took the same rhetorical approach. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I'm going to approach this in a way, and the result still ends up being the same.
Well, let me ask you this, because there was an article in the New Yorker by Jelani Cobb, and he stated that last week in a story about changes being made at Thomas Jefferson's estate, Monticello, the Washington Post referred to Sally Hemings, the enslaved black woman who bore several of Jefferson's children, as his mistress, a term that implies far more autonomy and consent that is possible when a man's legal property. And then last fall, McGraw-Hill faced criticism for a section of a history book that stated the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. I mean, are we revising?
No, we're not. We're not doing
history?
anything. The liberal press, first of all, we don't teach history in our public schools like we used to. That's number one. Our kids are devoid of understanding our history. You can see it in all these writings and everything else you can see. You can see it on all our campuses.
So whose responsibility is it then to make sure that it's done correctly?
The parents' responsibility to make sure their kids understand history and understand that the public schools teach their kids correct history. So that I do agree on. All I'm saying is that when the remarks are made by Democrats, you don't hear about it. When these crazy remarks or some of these stupid things are made by Republicans, it's news. It is not news. News is the fact that 600 and 700, 800 people were shot in Chicago. That's news. Our public schools, how many in Norfolk are accredited? How many in Suffolk are accredited? How many in Richmond are accredited? 3% of the black population at University at Virginia Tech, I believe, is black. 3%. And I'll look it up to make sure that's correct. The things that really matter to us, we just boil it down to some simple comment that someone made incorrectly, a misstatement, both of the gentlemen. But we don't talk about the fact that President Obama cut HBCU funding $300 million. At the same time, gave Kenya, $200 million. We don't talk about things that matter. The liberal press just want to take over and keep their ilk around people with misinformation. This is not important.
Roger.
I would comment this way. Shirley Carswell, a proud graduate of Howard University, as well as a former managing editor at the Washington Post, she wrote a column this past Sunday about 5 myths about HBCUs. And Bill, that's a myth that you're spouting about the president's his cuts in there. She gives it's much more detailed, it's much more nuanced than what you like to say.
I'll write it to you, but you are incorrect. You are not correct.
I have links.
You're not correct.
I put a link to that column on my Facebook page as well. But it's in the Washington Post. It's from over the weekend.
And it's incorrect.
Piece from her. Well, she's done the research, and she's a journalist.
And what does that mean?
Great for,
she's a liberal then. If she's a journalist, she's a liberal.
So what's wrong with being a liberal?
Can Roger finish his point, please?
Bill, sometimes you say stuff, and I don't even think you really believe them when you spout it.
Oh, yes, I do.
But she's researched it, and instead of the black and white that Bill likes to live in a lot of times, it's much grayer than that.
Wrong.
It's much more nuanced than that. And I wasn't surprised after reading it, after hearing Bill's comments all the years about what Obama has not done for
Other
HBCUs.
people have made those same comments, and I'll give you the facts.
Well, you go right ahead.
Well, the reason why it does matter, I would agree that you don't want to overemphasize and go hog wild over a comment, because we see that happen all the time. Mm-hmm. Somebody makes a comment, and all of a sudden we got the pundits on the air, and they talking about it, buzzing about it. But at the end of the day, is the needle moving for black people in this country? Mm-hmm. So I understand that point. But the reason why it does matter is because it reveals a mindset. And the mindset is what leads to policy decisions,
Amen.
Which is what leads to inaction, which is what leads to directed specific decisions being made that have a negative impact on people's lives.
Well,
Exactly.
do you
So that's
think
why
also,
it matters.
And can I just jump in here? You know, we've had some comments from some of the lawmakers in Washington, some Republican lawmakers from Washington. One from Representative Chaffetz about, well, you know, don't spend money on your iPhone and spend it on health care. And other things about, well,
That's
some of
true.
these folks who are going to get kicked off Obamacare, they don't really care about being healthy. You know, there's this mindset from people who didn't necessarily come up poor, or who didn't necessarily have to deal with people in their own families struggling to pay for health care. And there's these myths out there about what's going on. And it's a callousness.
It reminded me, that comment, of the whole comment of Bill Clinton, I believe it was Clinton administration, about the welfare queen. It was that same
Right.
idea of a woman going on welfare, having all the children, and being, you know, the queen, being the welfare queen, as opposed to wanting to work.
And
People
the truth of the
Go on,
matter,
I'm sorry.
Barbara, is that to Roger's point, is that people who hold this mindset, they are not only in government, they are also in the media. One of the problems that has happened to the media over the time, I think since the Watergate era, when you had Woodward and Bernstein, who through their work, through their great journalism, inspired so many people to go into journalism, is that you've had a shift from people who used to come up, and journalism was a craft, and they came from these different social classes. They still had they still had a people of color issue, because journalism still wasn't diverse, but you had people coming in from different social classes and had different mindsets and was looking at news differently. Since that period, you've got a lot of people who are in journalism who come from the same ilk, same cut as people in government. So their interests, their upper middle class interests are very similar, and their things that they fight over and they get interested in are very similar. And we're seeing this play out in the country right now.
Bill.
It's two things. The press gets interested in what they want to get interested in. They want to march and holler about things that are really not important. We wrote, I can give you a specific example, one that's pertinent to all of us. Hampton University spent $225 million on a proton therapy institute. We received zero help from, we got a little bit, but we received insignificant help from the Commonwealth of Virginia. At the same time, they were funding other research institutions and doing everything else. We wrote about it, even in the Virginia-Pilot. We wrote an editorial and said there's a difference in race, in policy, and politics. The arguing and yelling and screaming, as my good friend Wil is saying, doesn't mean anything. It's the policy that drives the issue. Now, he's going to say the funds weren't cut. Ask Norfolk State, ask Virginia State, ask Hampton, ask St. Paul's, because what she forgot to do is look into the reduction in Pell Grants, the onerous issue they put on.
So you've seen this same article that
Carol's agreeing with him. I saw Carol
No,
nodding.
because what they did was, it's two things they're doing, and it deals with what Wil has been saying for the last 10 years, which I've always agreed with him. It's on policy. I talked to her president at a meeting at a summit in Richmond the other day. I said, well, why can't Norfolk State reach out to Norfolk Public Schools and things? Because the government, the state government, won't allow them to do it because of policy. So when you make honor some student plus loans where black folks go and use their second mortgage and stuff to put their kids through school, and then you make the rules so hard they don't qualify for them, they can't get it. When you raise the level of Pell Grants where people that really need the money and are poor as dirt can't get it, it's the same thing. You lose money. You lose students because of that. When you take the same pile of money and then the Hispanic schools and the Asian schools get the money out of the same pie with more qualified students, of course, because there are fewer going, but at the same time, it cuts away from the schools that have been doing the mission that the United States of America has been doing for over 150 years. So if you just look at it aesthetically and said, oh, yeah, it didn't help, but you ask these schools, you ask Howard, who ran into a fiscal situation, at Florida A&M. You could go all the way down the list of the schools that were tragically hurt by a change in policy that reduced funding to HBCUs.
I find it kind of curious that Bill would say that. On one hand, he's been such a big proponent of charters and vouchers.
I still am.
But some of that is going to hurt some of the same people that you're talking about are that need to be helped. They're the ones who are going to be hurt by this from the policies that the new education secretary has said she wants to push.
Here's the other point, since you bring up the new secretary of education. I'm wondering, because of what Betsy DeVos said a week before Ben Carson came out with his comment. Okay, so she said, quote, historically, black colleges and universities have done this since their founding. They started from the fact that there were too many students in America who did not have equal access to education. They saw that the system wasn't working, that there was an absence of opportunity, so they took it upon themselves to provide the solution. HBCUs are the real pioneers when it comes to school choice. They are living proof that when more options are provided to students, they are afforded greater access and greater quality. Their success has shown that more options help students flourish.
See, this is where you have a problem when you have an education secretary who doesn't know about history and doesn't know about education on a wide scale. I know she's new to Washington, D.C., but she could have gone over to Howard University, or better yet, looked at the website to get a sense of what the founding about Howard, or to Morgan State, or to some of the other HBCUs.
Lincoln. She could have just gone to Lincoln.
The
first.
She could have probably walked to Howard, though. So,
That all were hurt.
The fact that you don't know these things is the fact somebody has to kind of hold your hand and say, that was wrong. You've made some comments there that are going to be deeply offensive, and they're just,
And
just not very accurate.
Yeah.
Well,
And why do you have an education secretary who doesn't know these things?
Let me get Carol in here first, because we haven't heard from you.
Yeah. The thing of it is, I understand how policy is formed, but now we have to move into making the policy. And unfortunately, we have an education secretary who is clueless, and we have people who are confused. I mean, the statement that Ben Carson made, the statement that
Are they
Betsy
confused, or is this deliberate?
I don't know them personally, so I like to think they're confused, and that it is our responsibility not only to make them aware, but perhaps make President Trump aware that he has to do something to get them ready to hit the ground, that they cannot just keep on making these statements, but what is the background? How do they gather information about these situations, and then from the informational standpoint, then say, okay, here's our next step.
Will, and then Bill.
Well, quickly, full disclosure, I'm a graduate of a DeVos Urban Leadership Program.
Oh.
So what she said should not reflect negatively on the DeVos name. The family is very much committed to
Amen.
Urban development, urban leadership. I think what happened in her case is, again, coming out of a tough confirmation and grasping and looking for links and to make connections to advance her agenda. She is basically being lazy, and again, being insensitive and doing exactly what Roger just said, or any of us could have done, or even in that conversation, that meeting, had talked and really spent some time getting a good grasp of what the whole HBCU history is all about. And again, it speaks to a minimizing mindset that this is somehow less than, and trying to make these links and these connections that really aren't there if you just deal honestly with the elephant in the room. You won't have to make these slips of the tongue that really speak to your mindset of being lazy.
And speaking of slips of the tongue, a caller just called in. The welfare queen comment came from the Reagan administration, not the Clinton administration.
Well,
I apologize.
Man,
Although the Clinton
what the Clintons did in terms of the drug war and all that,
the drug
devastated
war
our community.
and the requirement to work and all of that kind of fed into
That's
that
right.
same stereotype. But and all, to make sure we have facts correct. No alternative facts on another view. It was the Reagan administration. Go ahead, Bill.
The issue with this, she made a misstatement, no question about it, because she's not familiar as she should have been. But you can make the case either way. I've heard you, Carolyn, say 100 times of how you took students at Norfolk State and how they weren't ready, and you guys put all of your efforts, time, sweat, and blood, and money and resources in giving them another option. We do the same thing. These kids don't have another option. we know that if we can get them within our tents, we're not going to let them fail if they want to succeed. So, and you really get to the basic facts of it, she is somewhat telling the truth because there is still an option today. We're taking, and you are taking, kids that can't get in any place else because of the promise.
Yeah.
And we call it the Booker T. Washington students that we take because they have the stuff, but they don't have the resources. But if we're going to plow it in, I heard you said 1,000 times, that don't exist at UVA or any of these other schools who are or Virginia Tech who don't even take them. So if you really want to deal with what she's really trying to say, even today, the financing resources that other schools are getting, like Harvard and MIT and Johns Hopkins with $2 billion worth of research and grants and contracts that the government is giving them, and they're getting 50% IDC indirect charge, which means they can take 50% of that money and build up their infrastructures, and we don't have the same choices because the choices weren't there. Let's deal with the policy that's going to get us on an equal footing. So she made a misstatement. She shouldn't have said it. She did say it. She should understand what she should said. But then the liberal press is going to try to make this a big issue, and it is not.
Roger.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Bill, you're talking about policy. If somebody can't get right something so basic, something that's been around for more than 100 years, Howard's celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. And you mean to tell me in all of her years of living, she doesn't know what the origins of HBCUs are? And then you say, wait a minute, Bill, let me finish. Let me finish. And then you're going to tell me that somebody like that is going to be interested in policy that's going to be a benefit to us?
Let me tell you what
I think you're delusional.
Let me tell you what somebody like that did. They supplied billions of dollars and their resources to urban schools and to programs like my good friend over here attended that actually effectively made some changes. That's what she did.
But what she's going to be able to do as education secretary, which she doesn't even have a sense of what HBCUs are all about.
She's seeking our advice, and we're going to help her.
And when so many HBCUs let me finish, Bill.
Yeah, because your point is worthless. Because you don't have all the facts.
I don't talk over you.
Bill, now we said we were going to be polite on this show. Now, no.
Okay.
Now we are going to be polite on this show.
Will you please forgive me, Roger? Roger, I'm sorry.
When you have somebody who's going to be over the education policy in this country, and that individual doesn't know something as basic as this, how is she going to affect policy for us that's going to benefit us? Thank you, Bill.
Well, maybe, and I agree with you, Roger, maybe it would start with somebody in the administration, and I don't know as well as you do, kind of giving her an internship or people who are supportive of her who can get her up to speed and say, okay, before you speak publicly, these are the things that you need to know, and these are the things we need to work on. And by the way, where's the money?
Okay, if you're just joining us, we're talking about current events with the Another View Roundtable. Roger Chesley with the Virginian-Pilot, Carol Pretlow with Norfolk State University, community activist Bill Thomas, and journalist, author, and talk show host Wil LaVeist. Go, Will.
Well, I was going to say to Carol's point, Omarosa is a double HBCU grad. She went to Central State. She's got a master's from Howard. She's sitting right there. She set up the meeting. She's the go-to person. So again, it speaks to, I mean, let's just be real about this. It speaks to people not valuing this other person and their insight and feeling like they should consult with. That was an easy one.
I don't understand how you get to that position in this country.
You don't?
And my point being,
yes,
how do we allow people to get to the highest points in government and with this little knowledge? If what you all are saying is she made a mistake, she just didn't know, and so forth. I mean, to me, that's just basic knowledge that someone should have.
Because if you can pay, you can play.
Yep.
If you have influence, come on, you can make and be able to navigate areas where a lot of us can't. If you aren't of that kind of wealth, then you make specific decisions of how you're going to navigate your way through it. You're going to be perceived as non-aggressive or perceived as conciliatory. And quite frankly, the danger that I see is that we have African-American people who are in positions of influence in our courts, in our
mayor office.
in the mayor office, in our
City managers.
All sitting in positions where they make policy decisions or specific decisions that can impact your life. If anybody's ever dealt with the judicial system and gone through the justice system, I'm telling you, I've dealt with it personally. I would recommend you stay clear of it. You pay your way to stay clear of it, because a lot of times you're sitting before a judge and it's like this person is not there thinking in terms of justice and what is right. They're thinking in terms of making a decision that's going to advance their own agenda, their next move that they're trying to make. And this is what happens. And this is the kind of decision that Ben Carson, this is the kind of talking that he's doing. I want to see what is the policies that you're actually going to do.
And
so do we at NRHA and all the other public housing authorities, because we don't know. And all we keep hearing about are these cuts that are going to be coming. But what's going to happen to affordable housing, public housing, and so forth? Roger,
and
I'm coming to you.
Just
Bill.
coming back to Carson again, it didn't take long before he said something kind of bonkers. In that same speech, apparently on Monday, he had this whole idea about regenerating somebody's brain that people came back immediately and said, you can't do that. Whatever procedure he's talking about, there's no truth to that. So, again, it's not going to be long before he makes more comments like this.
Well, and, go ahead, Bill. I'll let you get there, and then we're going to go into the next topic.
I've actually spoke to The Voice. I've actually spoke to Dr. Ben Carson, who are going to have outreach to different areas, town hall meetings in different communities to try to figure out what's going on. They are actually listening to people. Of course, they don't know it all. I'm just saying, some folks are just so bent.
Are they coming to Hampton Roads?
I hope they will.
Oh,
I hope they will. They both will. I hope they will. But they're actually outreaching to folks. They're actually listening. We're actually sending in planks and giving them information as to what's needed to be done to correct some of the problems. If you are serious in correcting the problem, if you want to learn, if you want to get bolder and understand what you need to do. But I think there is a legacy, and I think there's an atmosphere, excuse me, Roger, of some folks, not you. Not you.
No, you can say it's me. That's fine.
No. I'm not saying that. I just think people hate this administration so much that any little thing or any big thing is just blown out of proportion without capturing what's ever to be done. Now, I've been in this business for 25, 30 years in terms of government relations and et cetera, and I don't care if it's a Democrat, Republican. I really don't care. What we try to do is push our agenda, like we did this year in the General Assembly, got a legislative law passed to help people with cancer. And we had to do it with policy, not marching and not all that kind of stuff, and we got it passed because we did what had to be done. My point is, I gave everybody a chance, and they all made mistakes in the very beginning. Okay. And I think that if we could just get away from this stuff, Ben Carson, regardless of the mistakes that he made, he's going to learn through this. I think he'll be okay. But if he may not be okay. But at the same point, the only thing I can say that he actually sat down for 5 minutes and listened.
Okay, when you talked to him.
I sat down and talked in 5 minutes. Okay, yes, that's a good idea. My wife and I, we think we're going to go out and we're going to listen. Hopefully we'll bring them here. You can talk to you and understand what you're doing at the Norfolk Redevelopment Housing Authority and other people. But at the end of the day, we don't have the financial resources to make our communities what they need to be, and we don't have the political power to push the policies and the laws that this young man's been talking about for the 10 years. And until we do that, all of this is for naught.
Carol, yes, so
I agree, because I hate to admit it, the first thing I'm thinking of when you have a policy, how are you going to implement it and how are you going to pay for that implementation, which means you have to go back to the budget. Now, as you look at the budget, and I understand that there will be increases in military spending, and I understand that, but education, how much is there? How much is going to be allocated for HBCUs? How are we going to fill this gap? So policy and money.
Well,
yeah, I would agree that this is an opportunity to engage people as opposed to playing the I'm just going to obstruct and I'm not going to agree and this and that. That's that political nonsense that does not move the needle. It just doesn't. It moves the needle for those individuals in terms of what their individual aspirations are to go to the next level.
But not the needle for the people.
Nope.
Last Saturday, President Trump tweeted, quote, "Terrible. Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism." This was the first of 6 tweets. Then he went on to tweet, quote, "How low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon Watergate, bad or sick guy." Former senior officials from the Obama administration denied the allegations, and a spokesperson for former President Obama, Kevin Lewis, said a cardinal rule of the Obama administration is that no White House official ever interfered with any independent investigation led by the Department of Justice. As part of that practice, neither President Obama nor any White House official ever ordered surveillance on any U.S. citizen. Any suggestion otherwise is simply false. Diversion from all the Russia talk, Roger?
Yeah, diversion and effective. The media, the news media, are caught in a bind. If a president makes a statement, you should report on it because he's probably the one most important, most powerful person in the world. However, in reporting it, you sometimes get the attention away from other issues, like the whole Russia involvement. And frankly, we don't know quite how to cover him because he makes all sorts of statements, often through tweets, that seem to have no basis in fact. And it gets the news media covering other stuff. We give that individual who holds the title of president a certain deference. But when somebody who lies or does not offer any proof of some of his assertions, you know, he's basically playing the news media right now, and I don't think we know exactly what to do about it.
You know, at first when he was tweeting and we saw him, I was thinking, okay, this tweet thing could be good because it gets directly to the public, his perspective. But now I'm thinking of it as a game strategy. Let me see how I can divert from what's really going on here, and they'll get off on this because Obama is beloved. What is it? The rating's 58%. Okay, I talk about this, and then they won't give attention to some of the other issues.
Well,
I agree with them 100%. He's the president. He can declassify, call the FBI, head in, put an end to it. But that is what he's doing. And to Roger's point, this is an opportunity, again, for the media to retool itself, to diversify itself, to bring in people. Because there's a whole bunch of people in the country that saw that and was like, oh, I know exactly what that is, and went on to what they were doing. But because the media is so full of political people that just, come on, we dealt with these people all the time. This is all they do, back and forth. Oh, what's the next thing going on back and forth? Roger knows this. This is what, I'm so glad I'm not in the newsroom. It's a lot of nonsense that goes on in there. And then they bring other people who think the same way. And then if you think contrary to that, it's like, no, we don't want to hear from you.
But let me ask this question, because it seems to me that over the past, this current administration and the past administration, that the protocol of the office, the sanctity of the office, is really being pushed back and challenged. I mean, were there other times when sitting presidents have criticized and called out other presidents, as Mr. Trump has done, or just like the congressman who yelled, you lie in the middle of the State of the Union with President Obama. I mean, there just doesn't seem to be any civility around the importance of the office anymore.
Not in this public way. But if you go back to the Nixon tapes, if you go back to stuff that LBJ said, if you go back further in the beginning, the founders and what they said about each other, you'll find the same types of things.
But
so it's just not in the public. It's just not in this public way. The media oftentimes was collusionary in some of this stuff. They didn't report about some of those things. Now he's tweeting it out. It's out there. And again, people also, the country is very, people don't have common sense in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of people who do have common sense, and they're able to see through the mess and see what is real and what is not real.
What Will said maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago is that the whole advent of getting news out is totally changed.
Yeah.
Our children don't read any newspapers. They don't read anything. They are fixed to these doggone machines.
They ain't reading, Roger.
No, they're not reading. They're just the kids aren't reading.
You're irrelevant, Roger.
No, I have newspapers.
Don't tell my bosses that, please.
No. Now there's a group that are reading, and actually my children do read because we all traded books for Christmas. But I can understand it. But they're not reading newspapers. They're reading this. They're reading what's coming across.
This is the phone you're talking about.
26 years old. They're reading that. There's a whole new medium. Trump understands it. And those people that are sophisticated to know, I knew exactly what he was doing 6 months ago. He's going to do that because he's going to do it. But he does bring some points across. Now, he's either the most ignorant man in the world, which I do not believe, or there's something behind this stuff with this wiretapping. It's not wiretapping. They're getting these conversations like they did when he talked to the president of Australia. Somebody is picking up his phone calls. And because that's what happens these days. It could be CIA, FBI, or some smart kid that's doing it. Mm-hmm. But somebody is recording his calls and they're leaking them out there. So he's not an ignorant man. And so I would doubt very seriously if he really don't have no evidence that somebody has done something. And I could be wrong, but I don't think I am.
You're wrong because he didn't have any evidence on the whole Bertha thing. What he is, he's a capitalist.
I think
he is a capitalist. He will capitalize on whatever it is that is out there that he needs to advance. He is not an ideologue. It's not really the Bertha thing was an opportunity.
That is correct. I agree
for
with
him to make a move for the presidency.
Get out there.
This is an opportunity to say Obama did this to me. Is an opportunity to divert and to move. So in that sense, he's a brilliant marketeer and he's a capitalist.
Roger.
Yeah, Will said a lot of what I was going to say. I mean, he manipulates, he capitalizes. I doubt very seriously there's anything
we'll see.
Truth to behind this. I think we'll find a lot more legs with what's going on with the Russia investigations if the Congress is really going to come along and do what they should do on those than we find on anything about wiretapping of President Trump. This is the same person who was at dinner with what leader down in Florida, and there were some.
And something happened in Korea.
You
in
know,
North Korea, and they were having a conversation.
And there's
about
stuff
it at the
going
table.
on the phones instead of doing this in a closed setting where your average diner wouldn't be able to see what was going on that was there,
so
there at Mar-a-Lago.
Are we as the public then just too into the way it used to be done?
Yes.
I mean, do we need to just loosen up and let the president do whatever he wants to do?
It's called old school.
No, I don't know.
I think I think it's
finish.
changed. I think it's changed. There'll never be a campaign like there were 10 years ago. That'll never happen. It'll just never happen.
But is there a responsibility that the president of the United States has in terms of how he negotiates, how he disseminates information, how the country is perceived?
1,000%. And it will come up to a test in 3 and 8 months. When people vote
3
again.
years and 8 months?
Whatever it is left.
But I think that, look, go ahead, Karen.
No,
Go ahead,
I was
Karen.
just going to say part of the perception would go through the press secretary, and maybe if he could talk to him and say, Mr. President, we need to do this. But when we see the press secretary on TV, he's clueless. He's doing a wordplay to protect himself, and it doesn't seem that he is actually, the communication is really strong to direct the president in the right direction.
The press secretary works at the pleasure of the president. So I mean, he's basically doing the president's bidding.
Exactly.
You know, nobody's going to tell Donald Trump what to do, and that's what is the concern among some people, especially when it would come to foreign affairs or any type of military action.
So should we be worried about how we're being perceived overseas? Does it matter?
Yeah,
We should be worried about the United States of America. I could get one hoot about what's going on in other places. We have too many. You have to set priorities in life. We have too many issues here. Like you're saying, what's going to happen to the people in the housing authorities if the money's cut? And they're going to cut the money. They can't raise military spending the way they are and not hurt somebody. So somebody is going to get hurt. So we have to worry about what's going here. I could care less about what's going on or what somebody in London or Tokyo or Hong Kong thinks about me.
Okay, so answer a question for me, and I know this. We're not going to delve into the specifics of the Affordable Care Act and what's going to happen with that. But what would you recommend to people to keep themselves informed? Because this is going to affect just about everybody ultimately. So how do we keep up with what's happening and where the changes are coming from, and who to believe? How do we know?
I think
Will.
you got to continue to read the information from the legitimate sources that are out there, and also engage your lawmakers and engage them on what is it that you want out of healthcare. I think we all agree that we want lower costs and we want a system that is going to be there that we can actually have healthcare. And there's a lot of talk. I mean, Obamacare didn't lower the costs. It increased people being able to have healthcare, which was great, but it didn't lower the cost. And this plan that's put out there now so far still hasn't addressed lowering the cost. And so I think if at the end of the day, I don't care if it remains Obamacare or Trump care or Ryan care or, AmeriCare. I don't care what it is. If it's doing what the majority is going to be in the best interest of the majority, then that's really what we need. Lower costs and again, listen to what they're talking about, access to health care. Access to health care means nothing. Access. I can have access to Trump Tower. Doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to afford it.
Right.
That doesn't mean anything. So you got to listen to language and listen to what's being said.
Bill,
You're on your own. I mean, you have no privileges that you expect somebody to take care of your feeding, your health care. I think there's a lot of things we can do. We're living longer. Health care is no free market. At one point in your life, pretty much when you get older, you're going to have health care, and it's going to cost a whole lot. We're living older. The reality is now cancer is the number one killer in Virginia today. Between the next 4 years, cancer, prostate, breast cancer is going to increase up to 69% in some area simply because we're getting older. So what we need to do is look at this holistically. We need to eat better. We need to exercise. We need to watch what we're doing. We need to be personally responsible for our health. And then we need to figure out how to create jobs and opportunities for people who can get into group sessions of health care delivery. And you got to work with the hospitals. We work with when I was over here in Park Place, we had the highest infant mortality rate in the entire state. We work with the people. We work with Food Lion. We work with the hospitals to come up with strategies to get a health care center there so people can understand what they need to do. So we're all part of this game. Health care is unaffordable. I came up with something that I got in a VA system by being a cancer advocate that took me down for a week. And it must have cost a fortune to get me out of that situation. And I'd never been sick a day in my life. So there's no free market opportunities for health care. It's only going to get worse. So all I'm saying is we all have a stake in this game. And what we have to do is do a whole lot of things personally responsible and then try to figure out how to hold our local politicians and state and local and national accountable for what we're doing. We can't go $7 billion over on building one of these airplane ships out here in Newport News, $7 billion, and spend $1 billion for an airplane and expect good health care.
speaking of Newport News shipbuilding, the slight of Congressman Bobby Scott?
Politics.
Different president, and he gets to do what he wants to do, and he slighted him. But I don't think Bobby Scott spent a whole lot of time worrying about it. I don't think he should either. Would he really have wanted to have been on the same stage? It would have been nice to have been invited.
Yeah.
But I doubt seriously, and I haven't talked to the congressman about this, but I doubt seriously that he cared much about that. And to me, it was a slight, and it was a one-day story, and let's move on.
Carol?
It is a slight, but isn't there something called common courtesy?
No.
And that even if you disagree with a person, you can, at least in a public forum, recognize that there are differences of opinion, and I agree that this person differs from me, but I'm going to give him the courtesy of being on.
Will?
That's not Trump's way.
Nope.
Trump, I mean, he, and I think he smartly looks at, okay, does this person benefit me or not? Just like when he said that to African Americans, he said, your communities are in a shambles. What do you have to lose? A whole lot of people got upset that he was never talking to when he said that. He was talking to folks in the hood that had the ability to vote or not vote. And that's who he wasn't talking to Roger or Bill or any of us. And they all got up, and Roger got all upset. I'm doing pretty good. You ain't talking to me. He said he wasn't talking to you. He was talking to the people in the west side of Chicago
who ain't doing pretty good.
That's suffering. Yeah. But that could have gone to vote for Hillary.
Didn't go.
That's who he was talking to. And so it's the same thing with Bobby. What I got to talk to Bobby for? He's not going to vote for anything for me. So that's his way.
It's all about what can benefit him.
And
he's a capitalist.
And that's all politicians. That's just
it's all good.
The only bad things I got, and again, I will step back to my good friend, everybody here, is the fact that I'm just upset about we're not focusing on what we need to focus on. And we're in this crazy game where they're going to win.
Who's they?
The people that are in charge now. So they're going to win. That's Democrats and Republicans, because that's all nonsense. The establishment is going to continue to keep their foot on our throats, and we're worrying about the wrong thing.
So we need to be worried about.
Instead of marching for economic justice in Norfolk or Virginia Beach or Hampton, we should be holding our legislators to a different call to get laws and policies passed where they'll outlaw this cronyism. That's what we got to do. So things are fair. That's what we're trying to do. And they pick and choose their issues. And, we've saved 2,000 lives over cancer in this area, with Portsmouth having the highest death rate of cancer in the whole entire state. There's no been anybody marching trying to say, let's try to help them, help more people, save their lives. The part is we have to change the policies. If we don't change the policies, we're going to be in the same boat that we have been since 1619.
From the beginning. We were going to talk about Moonlight. I know there's been a big controversy on Facebook about whether or not the Academy Award winner portrays African Americans. The majority of you have not seen it. Will, in about a minute or so, you said you did see it and you really loved it. And for our listeners, we are planning a show where we're going to talk about the responsibilities of movies and how we should be portrayed and so forth. So stay tuned. That'll be coming up shortly. But you got a minute.
Yeah, I can understand why people are uncomfortable with it and may not have liked it. But I thought that it was a wonderfully done human story about relationship and ultimately about how in this society we all have to struggle with being who we really want to be. And that's really what it was about. And I thought that the relationship between the mother and the son was just so profound for me, because in her dysfunction, right? Her dysfunction and leaving him out there like that was exactly, if she couldn't be there and nurture him, that was exactly what he needed in order to develop the skills to survive. And that was profound for me, that a lot of times in our dysfunctions, that ends up being what you need to be able to get through the situation.
Well, a lot of discussion about that. We're going to talk about it more on another show, but we appreciate your perspective on that. Thanks so much. And thank you so much for spending time listening to Another View. If you'd like to hear our show again or share it with a friend, please visit anotherviewradio.org and download the podcast. We're on Facebook, so like us, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next time on Another View, a report card on the equity efforts in Virginia Beach Public Schools. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Kamaria Mason answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so much for listening to Another View.